Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to St. Bart's in Midtown Manhattan. My name is Meredith Ward. I'm on the clergy team here, and on behalf of all of us, it is my delight and joy to welcome you here this morning to the forum, where each Sunday we have sacred conversations about the things that matter. This morning, we are delighted to welcome Alexandra Petri, who is a Washington Post columnist, a humorist, and author of the new book, AP's U.S. History, Important American Documents I Made Up. It's a book that satirizes American history, and this morning, Alexandra is going to talk to us about histories, fun facts, and regular facts. Alexandra, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you. Am I the wind that's blowing? All right. Hello. Good morning. It's so nice to be here. This is much fancier than my regular church, and which I've been trying to bring my toddler to church lately, which has been kind of a mixed degree of success that project's been meeting with. And last week I took her there, and they had the children's sermon, and everyone came up and they distributed rocks to all the toddlers. Is that something that you also did? I was like, what in the Shirley Jackson is this? They're just handing rocks to the babies, and then they sent them back, and for the next 40 minutes we had to sit there, now that they'd armed all the children, and you could hear clattering sounds and people going, shh, and no, and I sort of thought, like, what did they take from the story of Goliath? Like, the baby kept trying to throw the stones because she's like, I'm without sin. But I was like, no, last night you threw all of your noodles on the floor at dinner. And she's like, that's not a sin. I'm like, it's floornication. All right. Okay. Boo. Yeah. Move this lower.
Move it down.
Move it down. Okay.
There you go.
So, yeah. But I feel like there's a Bible verse explicitly about how you should not give stones to children, especially when they're asking for bread. But like, we literally have a window of a guy getting hit by stones, and he's a martyr now. But anyway, so I hope that you all didn't do that here, and I didn't just thoroughly like rant about your child program. But she loves and treasures the rock, so. I'm glad to be here this morning. I feel welcomed in the way that you only feel welcomed when you're not surrounded by small children armed with rocks. So what I'm here to talk about today, broadly speaking, is history. And I thought that what I might do would be to introduce the book, the project of the book, and then switch over to questions. And what I've been doing at other events is, before you administer questions to me, I administer questions to you, but like a sort of pop-up U.S. history quiz. And since I'm the sort of person who always dreamed of writing a fake historical textbook, to me the prospect of unexpectedly being administered a quiz fills me with excitement and delight, but I don't know if it equally fills you with that degree of joy, but hopefully it does. So I used to have ducks that I would give as prizes for correctly answering the questions, but we would throw them into the audience and somebody got hit with one in the head, because it turns out that if you're throwing a duck and you want somebody also to bend their head, there's not a good thing for you to yell in that scenario. So if you get the questions correct, you will just get dignity as your prize. So a little bit about me, which is I write a humor column for the Washington Post, which is where I yell at the news professionally. And there's a lot to yell about. And I think usually at work when people are referring to history, it's in a bad way. It's the sort of thing that keeps repeating and repeating, and we never are learning anything from. And so when you refer to something as historic or a milestone, or say a sentence that starts with the phrase, not since 1911, that's usually bad. That's usually a sign that the floodwaters have gotten too high or something of that nature. But when you're a church and people consider you historic, they give you a nice plaque, and they put you on a fun list. But when you're a person and someone says, you're history, that tends to be a threat. But the good thing about history is that if you don't like it, we keep making new history every day. And the bad thing about history is that we keep making new history every day. So I'm not a historian. I am somebody who has sort of, if not a front row seat to history as it unfolds, then certainly early access to the screener copies. And so I wanted to take a stab at the stories we've always told ourselves about the past and fill in the obvious gaps in the way we would fill them if those things were happening in the present. So for instance, I just think all of the documents that they give you a book of documents and they say, these are all the things you need to know about the past. And all of those implied to me the existence of other undiscovered documents. For instance, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas implies the existence of a draft where Hunter S. Thompson forgot to bring any drugs. Or Raymond Chandler's noir novels about the iconic private eye Philip Marlowe imply the existence of a lady in a sexual harassment seminar. John and Abigail Adams corresponded for years across the Atlantic. Do you mean to tell me that they never got frisky? And if so, what would that have looked like? Or Jonathan Edwards was a fiery preacher of the Great Awakening, and he had a whole sermon famously entitled Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, in which he unfavorably compared the listeners to spiders. All very well, but how would the local spiders have responded? And this book explores that question. It's all the documents that I thought should exist, but don't. And I thought actually I might start us off by encountering that sermon from the perspective of the spider. So my one biggest failing as an author is that I did not remember to bring my book with me. So instead of easily and efficiently reading it to you from a physical printed book, which I highly recommend if you're into that. Just look how I'm struggling here. Look how I have to pull up a file, and then I have to pull up another file, and I have to scroll, and my finger's getting tired. This is exhausting. This is not a best practice. Books are the way to go. So with that introduction, so here's the spider's response to the Sinners at the Hands of an Angry God sermon. Dearest sirs and all those to whom it may concern, it has cost me many pains to write these words, since I had to spell it all out letter by letter with my whole body, using fluid from my spinnerets. And at one point a dog ran through and ruined it all. I will be brief. Jonathan Edwards has besmirched my name and the names of many other spiders. We are all as good as any of God's creatures. I was sitting there in the center of my web, minding my own business, watching the web for the arrhythmic vibrations that indicate that a fly is present, so that I may seize the fly and stab him many times with my venom. When I heard him, the God that holds you over the pit of hell, much as one holds a spider or some loathsome insect over the fire, abhors you. Picture my surprise to hear myself mentioned and singled out in this sermon. I am not a congregant of Reverend Edwards, nor, frankly, after this sermon, am I inclined to become one. I am just a spider, trying my best to live my life. I don't make any pretense to being holier than anyone else, but I work hard for my family. I try very hard to put dead fly into the mouths of my thousands of spiderlings. I'm not ashamed of who I am. And if the only way Reverend Edwards knows to make his listeners fear the wages of sin is to insult me, I feel embarrassed on his behalf. I am a valued member of my community. I like to think that I provide a service and that what I do is honest. Generations of us have lived and died on this plot of land, and I hope my children and their children will continue the tradition of keeping flies out of this Congregationalist church. But perhaps we won't now. Furthermore, I am not a loathsome insect. I am an arachnid. Good day, sir. So, yeah. So that's the note from the spider. And no, but I think the stories that we tell ourselves about what happened in the past are fascinating, which is why I wrote this book. I was a classics student, and one of the things I loved about the very ancient writing of history was that they would just freely admit that they were making things up. Like Thucydides, from which we get Pericles' famous funeral oration, which later served as the model for the Gettysburg Address, among others. He has a little passage at the start of the book where he says, I wasn't there for this speech, but when I wasn't there, I would just come up with words that seemed to me like the sort of thing you would say on an occasion like that, which I love. I'm like, where is this energy today where we just make stuff up? I guess mostly Florida. No, but when I was writing AP's U.S. History, Important American Documents I made up, I had to put a little owl on the cover saying it was not approved by the College Board, little knowing, because I assumed that the College Board would get mad if you just started making up a bunch of things that were not factual and had massive, massive holes and should not be taught to people as actual history, and trying to pass them off as good things to put in a school. But it turns out the College Board actually was more chill with that than I realized. Anyway, so I should establish I'm not a historian. I have a slide that illustrates this fact. I was once in a documentary about 23rd President Benjamin Harrison, because nobody else wants to know information about Benjamin Harrison. He's the kind of president you have to learn things about against your will. Except for me, I'm like, well, nobody else knows about him. I'm going to corner the market. And so for years, I would tell anyone who would listen that I'm excited by Benjamin Harrison and I want to know more about him. And like when you have a grandmother who's really into ceramic cats, and like people know that, and suddenly her whole house just gets full of ceramic cats because whenever people see one, they bring it to her. Just so was it with me and Benjamin Harrison facts. People started sending me books about him. I got a 3D printed replica of him. The Benjamin Harrison house was like, you got to come and see events, and they gave me a little packet, because at that point they're like, you're an ambassador for Benjamin Harrison in the world, and you've got to represent him with correct information instead of just repeating over and over the one fact that you know about him, which is that he had 2 opossums named Mr. Reciprocity and Mr. Protection. That's not enough. He did more things. And I do highly recommend, if you're ever in Indianapolis, go on the tour of the Benjamin Harrison house. It's incredible. And they also spend a lot of the tour denying things in a very suspicious way. So like you go through and they say, and here is where there's a framed picture of this man who donated to him, but it wasn't a bribe. And he did get some land from him, but it wasn't a bribe. And it was totally fine. And you're just like, why are you volunteering that it wasn't a bribe? Or then they're like, here's his wife, who was his deceased wife's niece, but they didn't have an affair. I'm like, why did you need to tell me? So, a fascinating tour if you like lacuna, or lacune, a phrase I've never pronounced before out loud and will never do again after the success with which this attempt has met. Lacuni? Someone come up to me afterwards and tell me how to pronounce lacuna with like the plural one that has an AE at the end, and I will thank you and be indebted to you. So, they wound up doing a documentary about Benjamin Harrison called President at the Crossroads, and at that point I told enough people I was interested in him that they interviewed me, and you will notice that it does not say I'm a Harrison expert, it says I'm a Harrison aficionado, which I think is fair given what I said in the documentary, which is, quote, I think we have too many people in politics who are good at talking to people in small groups. We need people who are bad at that, and he had that gift. So, yeah, and with this credential, I was like, I'd like to write a book of history. And they're like, well, will it be real history? I'm like, no, it will be entirely made up history. And they're like, well, that seems within your capacity then. Let's do that. And so I proceeded to do that. And in the course of researching the book, I actually wound up hiring a fact checker, because I'm like, well, I know I'm making things up, but I don't want to make things up by mistake. I want to make things up on purpose, which I think more historians should think. And so I wound up learning that all of the underlying things on which I wanted to riff, were far wilder than anything I could have concocted. For instance, Nikola Tesla, who invented all the things that Edison invented, did you know he was in love with a bird? He was. He had a whole thing. And so I didn't have to make up the fact that he was in love with a pigeon. And he loved her, quote, as a man loves a woman. And when she left me, the light went out of my life. I just had to make up the fact that he had friends who would want to stage an intervention for him. So throughout history, it was like that. The underlying thing was already stranger than what I could possibly concoct. And so I emerged from this with a great desire to share with people the strange facts that I had learned along the way, which is why I came up with this quiz. And so, if you don't mind, I just need we'll do a warm-up. So, if we can find the Northwest Passage. Any guesses which one it is? All of the above, that's correct. But I think it is technically D. So good. All right, well, let's do another. So just stop Teddy Roosevelt when his family's acquired enough animals. A horse. snake. That's too many for me. A badger named Josiah. Does that feel like enough? Already at the snake, I would have stopped, but we got a Dr. Johnson, Fighting Bob Evans, Admiral Dewey, 2 more guinea pigs with less exciting names. This feels good. Should we stop here? No, all right, yeah. No, we've got Eli Yale, the hyacinth macaw. Well, that's probably enough. No, we've got a bear named Jonathan Edwards, an actual bear. There's a lizard named Bill. Another snake. Another snake. Well, this feels like enough. Is this enough? No, yeah, no, of course, no. There's a pig. There's a pig named Maud. There's Baron Spreckle, who's a hen. We've got a one-legged rooster. But surely, like, you can't possibly have more pets than this. No, you have a hyena, also named Bill, which is, I think, confusing. In addition to the fact that you have a hyena in your home, is also named the same thing as another less lethal animal. To me, that's a worst practice. We got a barn owl. Does this feel like enough? No, okay, we got Peter the rabbit. We've got 2 more rabbits. We've got a dog named Sailor Boy. We've got a dog named Jack. We've got a dog named Pete. And at this point, I realized that we might have pictures of these dogs. And so there's a dog named Skip, a dog named Rollo. Okay, another pony. Does this feel like enough? It feels like enough to me. No, we have 8 more horses, including Jocko Root, Renown, Roswell, Rusty, Wyoming, and Yagenka. Well, no, we also have a kitten. Oh, yeah, well, good. Now he stopped. So I think what we've learned from this is that Teddy Roosevelt had too many pets, and I think everything about him makes more sense when you know this. Speak softly, carry a big stick. Yes, you have a hyena in your home. I would speak softly and carry a big stick, too. I would. After that warm-up, I need 4 brave people or 3 moderately brave people and 1 person who's an abject coward. Okay, let's see. So I need somebody to answer this question. I should have had you raise your hand before I showed what the question was, because now people are like, I know a lot about Parson Weems, or I know nothing about Parson Weems. Can I have a hand? A person who wants to jump into the breach? Or we can answer them communally. Okay, great. So, according to Parson Weems' George Washington biography, which of the following did George Washington's father say to him when he said that he could not tell a lie he had cut down the cherry tree? Was it, "Thank you for your honesty," or "Run to my arms, you dearest boy, run to my arms, glad am I, George, that you killed my tree, for you have paid me for it 1,000-fold. Such an act of heroism in my son is more worth than 1,000 trees, though blossomed with silver and their fruits of purest gold"? Yes, which I think is ironic, given that the book is about how telling lies and making things up is bad. But I'm sure that's what his father really said to him in the moment. After that very real incident. Apparently he also said that if you lied about it, "Dear as you are to my heart, gladly would I assist to nail you up in your little coffin and follow you to your grave," which, yikes. So I don't think that's the best practice. So, okay, do we have another brave volunteer? See how well that went? Yay, okay, great. So this question is, Liberty's mouth was so close to my face that his whiskers tickled my ear. I whispered back, "Nobody is going to use you. They might as well try to tame 1,000 wild horses with nothing but a whistle." Is this or is this not a line from Rush Limbaugh's series of self-insert historical fiction novels for middle grade readers? No, it is. It is. All the covers look like this. This was my favorite book of made-up history, I think, just in terms of how egregious it was throughout, and how oddly sensual the descriptions of Liberty the horse consistently were. Let's move on from that. So, okay, everyone, according to the campaign song, "Little know ye who is coming if John Quincy not be coming." What is coming if John Quincy not be coming? Is it A, famine, B, Bannon, C, plunder, D, wonder, E, slavery, F, knavery, G, jobbin, H, robin, I, knives, J, fear and pestilence, K, hatin, L, Satan, M, all of the above? It is all of the above. Yes. Good job. Oh, all right. And for a final question, I think this is the hardest one. It's an one or the other, and it's called Which Garfield? So you just need to tell me which Garfield I'm talking about. Cat Garfield or 20th President James Garfield? Which Garfield was born in the kitchen of Mama Leone's Italian restaurant? Cat. Very good. Okay, we're 1 for 1. We're great. Which Garfield was fed beef broth rectally for 3 months until he died? It is the president. It's the president. Okay, well, this is going to be a breeze. Which Garfield loves lasagna? Yeah. Which Garfield would have preferred lasagna to being fed beef broth rectally for 3 months and then dying, which happened to him? It's the president, yeah. And here's the book about it, Feeding per Rectum, as illustrated in the case of the late President Garfield and others, which I don't love. I don't love that. It's by somebody named Dr. Bliss, which seems like a misnomer. But yeah, I would hate, of all the books I would not want to appear in, I think appearing as and others in this book, by far the thing I would enjoy the least. Mike Pence delivered a birthday address to him on the floor of the House of Representatives. Cat Garfield or President Garfield? I hear President Garfield. I hear Cat Garfield. Okay, let's see. It's the cat! Yeah, Garfield is a Hoosier, so he's, Jim Davis. He was described in the speech as a human in a cat suit and a large orange American tradition. Yeah, so, okay, we're doing pretty well. Hates Mondays. Cat, yeah. Hates Mondays. The day he died in 1881 after being shot by Charles Guiteau and then being fed beef broth rectally for 3 months. It's the president. And finally, is alone in an abandoned house and has hallucinated every interaction we associate with him for the past 40 plus years, according to some Halloween comics from the 80s. It's the cat! Yeah, check it out. Very spooky. So, great job, everyone. You did it. Yay. Well, now that I've thoroughly questioned you, I feel like I deserve to receive questions. So I will turn myself over to you.
Thank you, Alexandra. Let's give Alexandra a round of applause. This was fantastic. Thank you so much. So yes, we're going to open it up for questions from the audience. If you are here in person, Kate has question cards and pencils, so just raise your hand and she will bring you a card. You can write your question down and she'll bring it up. If you're joining us online, you can put your questions in the chat or the comments section, or you can email me at mward@stbarts.org. So I have a question, just to get us rolling as we're waiting for the other questions to come in. These made-up documents of yours seem to actually sort of expand our understanding a little bit of like who these people were. Do you think that adds like dimension to the real historical characters, or is it just for fun?
Well, I think hopefully it's the kind of thing where you read one and you think, I want to learn more about this guy, or I want to learn more about her, or hey, what's going on in the actual past? But I think one of the funny things about like the roster of stories that we so often get told about the past is that if things were happening in the present, there's this like David Hume quote about where he's like, well, we just are willing to accept that because something was pretty long ago, the rules of physics were suddenly different. And I think it doesn't just go for the rules of physics, it goes for like, well, George Washington was a phenomenal, poreless creature who accomplished everything he set his mind to effortlessly. It is one story that kept getting handed down. And it's like, well, in fact, he was a human being, and he was like living in a time period when all kinds of stuff was going on. And so I think trying to find sort of the human corners in a lot of these very marble statue stories was one of the things that I was excited to do.
Yeah, because it sort of brings them to life, even if it's in a made-up way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I think because a lot of these are sort of implied by the things that do exist. Right. You're like, well, if it worked this many times, there has to be a time when it didn't work. Or if it like if there's an Erie Canal, there had to be one guy who heard that there was going to be an Erie Canal and thought, I bet that's the 2E Erie. I bet it's a really spooky canal. A lot of this is just sort of things that they made me laugh because they were silly, and I hope that at least one other person laughed, and if not, I apologize to those reading the book.
Well, and speaking of things that make us laugh, thanks. Your column, I'm getting a little off the topic of the book, but your column addresses things that are happening in the world today and makes us laugh. What do you think we're living, and there's an awful lot of good material out there right now. Do you think that this is a particularly fertile time in our national history based on your knowledge of the past, that today is a particularly fertile time for humor and satire?
I think we've always been in a particularly fertile time. I mean, whatever time you're living in, there's always something wild going on. And like, as sort of, as the classicist in me is like, oh yeah, this has been going on since Aristophanes was trying to make fun of the situation at least. Like, he had this whole play where he was just like, oh my goodness, the politicians are doing a bad job, and also I'm nervous when I send my child to the university that he will come back with ideas I don't agree with. And like, it was like 400 BC. And so really there's kind of nothing new under the sun, but the fact that there's nothing new under the sun isn't that reassuring, because if you look at what was going on in history, it wasn't like, and everyone just sat in a nice chair and had a good time. It was, history was not a safe place. And so I think there is a lot happening, but there's always been a lot happening.
There's always been a lot happening.
Although I'd like to imagine there was like 1 year at some point when everyone just had a basically nice time. Yeah. I always think like if I were a time traveler, because I mean, I was an English classics major, so I don't, like if I got back in time, there's some time periods where I just don't know any of the things that happened. And so, you get to like 1 year and you're like, oh, well, I know they're going to invent the Ford automobile this year. I'm going to make my fortune. But then you get there in like 1858 and you're like, I don't know what to buy. I don't remember what happens. Like, so, yeah.
So you mentioned that you put a disclaimer on the cover of your book, as opposed to other sources of fake news, shall we say, that do not include disclaimers. Did you do that so this doesn't end up as a question on an AP history exam?
Well, I think it still might, but I hope that, in the sense that it is genuinely excited about history and wants people to go out and learn more history, I think, like, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but I do think it would be the worst thing in the world because it is not a real history book. Everything in it is a lie that I made up. So for that reason, I think it would be bad. And yes, I just wanted to clearly flag it so you wouldn't be like, but look, there's a flag on the cover. I gotta put this in my curriculum. I don't care what else is in it. Which I think sometimes can happen.
So it feels like, this is a question from someone, but it does feel like these are scary times, and we need humor now more than ever. Do you think that's true?
I think we've always needed humor, and I mean, I have to think that because I have actual friends who are doing like the day-to-day work, like trying to do policies and make people's lives better, and like slowly, chip away at what's going on. And I think, well, what am I doing? I'm just sitting at a computer and typing, and occasionally I can get a pun into a column, and that's a big banner day for me. But I feel like most people who are involved in sort of somewhat decorative feeling lines of work, we have these very grandiose justifications about how, like, well, but the human soul needs what I do, in a way that, like, you making bread, the soul doesn't need bread. It's like, well, I think people do need bread before they need, like, whatever it is you're doing for the soul. Like, if you have to have an internet connection in order to access the thing that you're making, then maybe it's not like water. But that being said, I hope that people are enjoying, like, are finding things that help them get through the day, whatever that is, whether it's getting your cup of coffee or reading something that someone has written that makes you laugh. And I think people need the stuff that helps them have an easier time of it. Like, we're not supposed to be toughing it out and being miserable. We need joy. So I hope that making fun of things and sort of making eye contact over the news is something that is helpful.
Well, I think that's really true, because you can pick up the paper or open your feed on any given day, and the news is just awful. Like, one story after another is just terrible, and then you read a sort of a humor column like yours, and it sort of changes your perspective a little bit. It's like, oh, maybe we can open this up and laugh at it a little bit. And as you say, connecting over the newspaper.
Yeah, I think it's hopefully, because you don't want to lose hope. I think hope is a nice thing to have. And if there's a way of, like, instead of just being like, this is unremittingly bleak and I don't know what to do about it, you can be like, this is unremittingly bleak and I don't know what to do about it, with like an exclamation point at the end. Then you can build off of that exclamation point and eventually gather other people with exclamation points and agree that maybe you can change it into a question mark. I didn't really think that punctuation metaphor out in advance, but going from like knowing you can't do anything about it to thinking maybe you can, because you've all had coffee together and sort of gazed at the newspaper.
Yeah. So I think you sort of touched on this a little bit, but what got you started writing this book, and when did you start writing this book? Was there something in the atmosphere that got you going?
Well, the thing in the atmosphere that gets me going the most, for sure, it's got to be that rich hybrid of like oxygen and nitrogen. Every day I'm like, gotta put this in my system. I don't wake up, I don't leave the house without it. I gotta have it. Sorry, I got so excited that I was going to say that I forgot what the question was. The book. Yes. So I'm one of those sort of nerds who's always wanted to make up a textbook. Like, that's just been on my bucket list for a long time. But not just like specifically the textbook where you actually go through all of history, but the ones that just like, here's a bucket full of weird documents. Because I just love to go to a library or an archive and like read through somebody's mail. I love that we can do that. That's just so exciting to me. So that had always been something I wanted to do, and I wound up writing it right around the same time that I was about to have my toddler, who's now armed with a stone, marching around Washington, D.C. And so we actually came up pretty close on the deadline of like the book and the baby were coming out right around the same time. So I was like trying to write jokes about Ernest Hemingway as I'm like sitting there in the delivery room. So that added a little urgency to turning the book around. And it was like, the years when I was working on it were sort of during the height of the pandemic isolation. So it was like, genuinely my deadline was like 2021, and I forgot that was the year that it was, because my sense of time had been so distorted. And so like my editor was like, hey, it's when your book was due, where's the book? And I'm like, oh, this is 2021. This year is 2021. I was sort of thinking of 2021 as like an alternate history year that didn't wind up happening because 2020 happened. And instead, it still happened. It just was, so anyway, he was understanding about that very peculiar explanation, and then we sort of worked on it in like tranches. And it was not like, obviously it was work, but it was also exciting to be forced to escape in a direction that wasn't just like, let me stare at the news. It was like, well, I'm gonna go stare at someone else's news now. Yeah, I'm gonna take a break from writing and go write.
So besides the ones that you shared with us already, what do you have a favorite fact or favorite made-up document in your book?
Oh man, it sort of swaps around each time. For a long time, I was a big fan of the Hourmen, which is the one about, like, the Minutemen, and their whole thing was they're going to be ready in a minute to go to a location not previously specified. And I always thought, that doesn't seem real, that seems made up, based on how long it takes me to get ready to go anywhere. I think a more realistic thing would be the Hourmen, and it would take them about an hour to get ready to go where they needed to go. And so I wrote the diary of one of the first Hourmen, and he's supposed to show up at the Battle of Bunker Hill, but he misses the battle, and because he's trying to he didn't get all his boots organized, and his wife is embarrassed, and so that was fun. I think my mom's favorite is Big Women, because she just thought, like, I was like, well, if Little Women exist, then Big Women surely exist. And it's just like they're all giants, and most of it just revolves around, like, there's mayhem in the town because they're 60 feet tall, and no one knows how to cope with the March sisters. And so just that sort of Venn diagram intersection of like a very silly thing and a semi-historical thing is my favorite. So yeah, those are both up there.
Those are great. Those are hysterically funny. All right, here's a stumper question.
Uh-oh.
It's a presidential question.
Ooh.
And if you can't answer it, we'll see if anyone else here can answer it.
Oh, great.
This is from an online viewer who asks, which American president was sworn in at 123 Lexington Avenue?
Oh, Lexington Avenue. That sounds like it's in New York. Wow. And, well, because I think, okay, so here's my thought process, which is I had this erroneous feeling that, like, George Washington didn't get sworn in like, our usual place, that he might have gotten sworn in, like, Philadelphia or New York or somewhere. So my guess is George Washington, but, because, like, I guess, because Coolidge got sworn in Vermont. I know that. They had a special, like, come hang out with us at 3 a.m. and we'll do the anniversary of the Coolidge swearing in, which I just, I'm so mad I didn't get to go to that. But I could have jumped ship from Benjamin Harrison completely and gone all in on Silent Cal, who at least had, like, good jokes. But although Harrison did have good jokes, sorry, I'm stalling for time on the president question.
This is a hard one. I mean, this is like one of those presidents.
Oh, okay.
This is one of those. It's not George Washington because Lexington Avenue didn't exist.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so we
but
know.
It's one of those presidents that I don't, that like sort of slips through the cracks.
Okay, well, this is helpful. No, those are my favorites. Let's see. So I don't think it was John Tyler, because, like, what would he be doing there?
Right.
Then, okay, we got, well, after James Garfield, could it be Chester Arthur? Yes, Chester Arthur, because he's, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Tammany Hall, big politics.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. I'm totally impressed.
Yeah. So, mutton
right.
chops. Love to stay up late.
Awesome.
In the pocket of what's his name. There's a great book called Madame Restel about it. Basically, in addition to telling you about the story of Madame Restel, who was giving, like, abortions back in the day before the Comstock Act, it gives you a full portrait of, like, 18th or 19th century New York life. And anyway, big recommend. Check it out. And I'm now forgetting the name of the man who was in charge of Tammany and in whose pocket Chester A. Arthur was. But yes, Boss Tweed.
Boss
I think
Tweed.
he was actually a little bit later, but there was this other guy who was, like, very tall, like very dandy-ish, and he and he and Garfield were weirdly buddies, or was it Grant? Anyway, Roscoe Conkling. Yeah. All right. Yeah, Roscoe
By the
Conkling.
way, you were on Jeopardy too, right?
I was.
Yeah. How'd you do?
I did not win, but the person who beat me went on to become a champion, so I like to think, it wasn't my failure, but her success. That being said, I did make a Final Jeopardy wager that all the forum commenters were like, this is one of the worst Final Jeopardy wagers of all time, because the people who were beating me were tied, and so in that situation, you bet nothing because they both have to bet everything, or that was what the logic was. And I bet everything, and I got the Final Jeopardy wrong, which to this day I'm mad about. But it was, the question was like, the judge in a ruling on this author's works included a secret code. And it was 2006. Does anybody have a sense of what this was? Like, who was a big author who had secret codes in his work? Because, yep, it was Dan Brown. So
there we go.
And the annoying thing was I wasn't even like, well, I never read the Da Vinci Code, so how could I had read the Da Vinci Code. So I had been assigned to read it for my Bible class, actually, in high school, because I guess they were like, we're reading the Apocrypha. Let's have, like, a little fun, throw this in there.
Oh, wow.
So treasure hunt, if you will.
We'll put it on the list here at St. Bart's, too.
You should, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very quick read.
It is. And also made up.
Yes.
Okay, we've got time, I think, for one or two more questions. Here is another kind of silly question. Where did it go? Who would win in a fight? Cat Garfield or President Garfield?
Ooh. Oh, I think it depends on when you get him in his life, President Garfield, because he was pretty fit. Like, he fought in the Civil War when he thought that, like, I forget what it was that had happened, but he was about to go on a vacation, and he did like a handspring over his bed, and he's like, you know, as president. So he was in good health up until he wasn't. So I think, but Cat Garfield, he's mean, he's sharp in a way, like with the claws that President Garfield was not, and he's not above sort of mental games. I don't know. I think Cat Garfield probably. I think Cat Garfield
would win. So maybe the next thing is to explore all these presidents who we don't know anything about. You know, that's like, that would be really cool.
I think it would be. I feel like you'll get like the most specific room full of people ever who are like, we too care about Chester A. Arthur. But it'll be my people. I'll be like, all right, yeah.
You know, it's a thing. It could become a thing.
Now, one of my favorite things, there's a guy who put together a CD recording of all the presidential campaign songs from Washington to, I think, Clinton. And so I've been playing those like for the toddler, and now she thinks that Rockabye Baby is about Tippy Canoe, and like it's because Martin Van Buren had like an anti-Tippy Canoe and Tyler 2 version of Rockabye Baby, and it's phenomenal. And so at the end of it, she goes Tippy Canoe. Anyway, so someday, she's having an experience for sure, But I highly recommend the Martin Van Buren cover of Rockabye Baby because it slaps.
Do you have a recording of it?
Oh, yeah. Or I could sing.
Go ahead.
We can all sing it. No. Yeah, it goes, Rockabye Baby, Daddy's a wig. When he gets home, hard cider he'll swig. When he has swug, he'll fall in a stew, and down will come Tyler and Tippy Canoe.
And with that, we just need a little melody there, and we're all set.
Oh, yeah. The spoken word Rockabye Baby.
Rap. Okay, Alexandra, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been a joy to have you with us. Thank you so much. We definitely all need a good laugh these days, so thank you. Next Sunday, I hope you'll join us again when we will welcome author and art historian Charles Scribner, who is also a member of St. Bart's, and he is going to lead us in a conversation on Christian art and music and the ways in which art and music can lead us to the sacred. So thank you all for being here. Please join us at the 11 o'clock service, starting at 11 o'clock and live streaming also at 11 o'clock. And Alexandra, thanks again.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you here.